This year, we are already witnessing anything between 30 to 100 new cutting-edge artificial intelligence products rolling out into the market every month. Journalists and media organizations are quick to underline that they will only use artificial intelligence sparingly in their reporting, news gathering, and dissemination, at least in Europe. Several European news outlets have published charters and AI use guidelines. Our keynote will take stock of this hot trend in journalism, with a particular eye on science journalism, addressing the complex and layered relationship between AI and the media as it is unfolding across the world. Why should the media automate? And how current technologies can be implemented in ways that benefit readers, writers, and editors. Let's hear it from Helga Reitz. She's a science writer and communicator at the ETH AI Center in Zurich, Switzerland.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Let me start by saying I'm super happy to be back to India, to be invited as a speaker to this conference, to this inaugural conference, and to be greatly supported in this by the Embassy of Switzerland as we celebrate 75 years of collaboration between Switzerland and India. When I joined the ETH AI Center, which is an interdisciplinary competence center at the National University of Switzerland, in early 22, so this was before the release of DALL-E and ChatGPT, I first set out to research how Swiss newsrooms cover AI. I found very few very good stories, but otherwise across the board, the results were rather disappointing because most stories were very shallow. AI appears in them as a kind of magic dust. The storyline usually is something like researchers had problem A, B, and C. They applied machine learning to it, and look, the result was better. So this is black box reporting. It leaves out questions on why this worked. There's no discussion of the limitations, how the training data sets limit the useful range of the models, how biases in the training data might skew the results towards one or other parts of the population. And there's no discussion of costs, conflicts of interests, or the potential monetization of these models. So it was quite tangible that at that point in time, there was not enough expertise in the newsrooms to meaningfully report on the developments in AI. When I invited a science reporter from one of the big Swiss newspapers to one of our events, and the event was about conversational AI, which is about chatbots and their applications, he responded he wasn't interested. He said readers would only click on his article if it were about the question when AI would outpace human intelligence. So that was the state early 22. Luckily, that situation of having a new field covered and mainly being this kind of black box reporting is not entirely new to science journalists, especially because we have seen similar developments with the advent of green energy and clean tech, with covering climate change, the metaverse, cryptocurrencies, and more. So what normally happens is that over time, certain guidelines are established on how to report on these issues. A helpful analogy is to look at how the reporting on medical studies has changed over the course of time in Europe. About 20 years ago, science journalism was very en vogue in German-speaking media, and even regional and small outlets took pride in having a dedicated science section. But a lot of the coverage was really poor because it was the same kind of black box reporting as we see today for AI, just on medical studies. And the stories would read like, coffee will help you slim down, a new study shows. Or cats are good for your mental health, a new study shows. Or exercising 10 minutes a week is sufficient to stay fit, a new study shows. You get the idea. So what happened then was that a number of German institutions set out to prepare a framework on proper reporting on medical studies. They work together with the institutions that educate science journalists and science communicators and made workshops at conferences like this one to improve the quality of the medical reporting in German-speaking media. The same can work for AI. So, those rules are for now not yet established, but you can find them by looking at some blog posts. And recently also the UNESCO, in June 23, the UNESCO published a handbook on how to report meaningfully on AI, which sticks to these guidelines. And so here the recommendation is just to ask certain questions and keep certain limitations of AI generally in mind when reporting about it. These are to ask for the limitations of models and its applications. This is the question of the robustness of the model. Will it perform as well out there in the wild as it did in the lab with the training data? Ask what was in the training data set and where potential biases could come from. This is the question of fairness of an ML model. And then there's the question of whether the user's data are safe. So the question of privacy. And this triptychon of robustness, fairness, and privacy is often called in AI trustworthy AI. So we have to probe the trustworthiness of an AI model to come to grips with whether it's a good model or not. So while we were still discussing this, there came the release of DALL-E in April 22, followed by Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and more, then ChatGPT in November 22, and a tsunami of applications built upon those large language models and image generators. There's a portal called There's an AI for That, and it keeps track of AI tools publicly released, so for everyone to use freely on the internet. And it counted for every single month this year more than 100 new releases, topping at 287 in March. And that's only what's publicly accessible. There's more in the B2B, in the business-to-business space. There are a lot of models released that you're not even going to see as a normal user. So this unleashed waves of hype, but also of fear. The fear was mainly propelled by a study released in March 23 by OpenAI, the company behind DALL-E and ChatGPT. And that study was discussing which job profiles were most at risk to be replaced or impacted through AI in the near future. And they placed journalists, writers, and authors amongst the top 10 most likely jobs to be replaced by an AI soon. More solid investigations don't agree with that, but they didn't get as much coverage. So there are more serious investigations that come to the conclusion that about 20 to 25% of the tasks that a journalist does on a daily basis could be automated in the near future, which is a completely different narrative, but it doesn't make headlines as much. So in early 2023, a lot of newsrooms set out to set guidelines for the use of AI in their reporting, and this was very much propelled by this study, by the study of OpenAI that said journalists could in the near future be replaced by AI. And all of these guidelines stress that the reporting is a fundamentally human task, that AI-generated content should only be published with human oversight, with clear labeling, and that the usage of AI should be limited to a very few, very basic tasks in the newsroom. That's all very sensitive and meaningful, especially with an eye on the trust of the readers that you don't want to lose. but it was also ripe with fear. It was really tangible that the media outlets were trying to cope with this idea of having automated news very soon. And this was even more tangible if you spoke one-on-one with journalists from Switzerland. An example was that one of the major Swiss newspapers built a tool that generates headlines based on the first few paragraphs of a text. And they said, well, this is a tool, it's in beta testing, and only very few people in the newsroom have access to it. And we are going to collect the results and then see whether it makes sense to use it. And I responded, well, honestly, you can do the same by plugging in your first few paragraphs into ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to generate a lead and a headline. And do you know how many people in your newsroom actually do that? It's probably 90%, 99%. So, while media outlets stressed that on the production side they would be very careful rolling out AI, there was the product development people in the same media houses that were already all in on using AI. If you speak to people in product development at the media houses, they have a completely different perspective. They see AI as a huge chance, as a huge challenge, but also an opportunity that has to be seized in time. They are mainly interested in automatic translations. There's one Swiss newspaper, it's a free one that you get when you ride a tram. And this is now distributed in 9 languages, and all of these languages, so all of the translations are generated with DeepL, the AI translation engine. The languages, so you might wonder why a population of 8 million people needs a newspaper in 9 languages. So those are the 3 official languages of Switzerland, plus the ones of our major groups of immigrants. Then there was the question of accessibility. So especially Swiss radio and television was interested in making certain pieces of audiovisual content more accessible to people in other parts of the country or to people with hearing disabilities. They also wanted to use AI to personalize front pages, to optimize user journeys, and so on. Whereas if you ask someone who works in the newsroom, so in the production of the news itself, they would say, well, we use AI to translate some research pages. We are using Otter to take meeting notes. We are using voice to text to transcribe our interviews. And we use some rule-based text generation, for example, to create a text on the weather forecast or on sports results. So that means that in the newsroom itself, the AI tools that are being used are very generic office tools, and that barely scratches the surface of media production. I think that's not sufficient because there are so many repetitive, mundane, and cumbersome tasks in the newsroom that could and should be automated for the sake of just saving time for everyone. What we've seen since 2000, roughly, was the digitalization of the media. And this added numerous tasks to the news production. So nowadays, you don't just produce a story, you write it, and then you produce it for the print paper, and then you move on to the next story. No, they also want you to produce a version for the e-paper, for the online portal, for the mobile app, often with different headlines, teasers, and graphics adapted to the channel in question. Then they ask you to do an Instagram story on it, a short video clip, and to create some input for the newsletter. So you're busy repackaging the same content all the time. And another result of the digitalization is that news stories that cover ongoing news are updated several times a day. So we spend so much time just repackaging news instead of really researching news stories. And that has significant impact on the people in the newsroom. What is now important in the newsroom is agility more than expertise. What followed was that the people who get hired into the newsroom are younger and less educated than they were 20 years back. The editors-in-chief must prioritize young people that are very versatile with new online tools over people that have a lot of expertise in a given field. That, in turn, made the job profiles available in a newsroom rather unattractive for people who had previously gained a master's degree in science, for instance. And all that development doesn't make news better, it just makes news faster. Therefore, I think if we want to aim for high-quality journalism, especially in areas that require a lot of expertise, which is foreign affairs and politics, but also climate change, health, and environmental issues, and probably these days AI, we should try to stop that vicious cycle of acceleration and downgrading the job. And here AI can be a true game changer, only if we embrace it. So I think if journalists and publishing houses were to take AI and the chances it opens up for us seriously, we could make tools that really streamline the production processes in the newsroom. What about a tool that auto-summarizes the latest developments in a given field? Say, war in Ukraine, grain exports from Ukraine, war in Gaza, green tech development in a given region, in 2 to 3 paragraphs based on what is already in the archive. What about tools that make multimedia production seamless, where you can produce one story and then automate the tailoring of headlines and teasers to a variety of channels? What about an assisted editing tool that automatically puts in references and relevant resources into your article? Those tools exist today for scientific writing. It would be a no-brainer to do the same for media houses. However, that's not a minor task. So to get there, we would need journalists, editors, and publishers alike to really seize the opportunity, to forge strong alliances with research institutions, with companies and startups that build software, to build the tools that could truly make a change in the newsroom. And it could also mean that we need to build up national large language models that are not owned by some private company in Silicon Valley. Because if you want to tap into these models, you better know what went into the training data and how these models work at their inner workings, which brings us back to how we report on AI. Thank you very much for your attention.